the Founding Daddies, public media, and hypocritical race theory.
Perception is reality. Perspective shapes the world around you. I'm JJ Weinberg, and this is my perspective. Greetings and salutations. My name is JJ Weinberg. I am an artist, an activist, an alchemist, an author, and I am none of these things. Every episode starts the same way, but I want to tell you something. I'm really grateful for Voga Barnes and Denny, the underwriters for this program, Greg and Paul and all the people who brought this thing together, brought me here to WVLP.org, all of my co-broadcasters. Thank you. So last week on the show, we talked about forgiveness, not the bumper sticker version, not a spiritual bypass, but forgiveness as a serious, disciplined act. Like I've said, gratitude is a decision. Love is a decision. Forgiveness is a decision. The kind of forgiveness that doesn't erase memory or excuse the harm, the kind that gives over the demand for reciprocity so that the harm does not keep living through you. It happened to you. No, it happens through you. Because when something remains unforgiven, it doesn't stay in the past. It eats at us, it gnaws at us. It becomes something that happened to you instead of through you. So I want to kind of pick back up on that because forgiveness isn't just personal. It's cultural, it's political, it's generational. And that brings me back to Archie Bunker. So there was an episode I did after Rob Reiner passed asking, how did we go from meatheads to bunkers? How did we go from Michael to Archie? And how do we go from curiosity to contempt, from questioning authority to sanctifying it? There's this moment that I saw. My brother sent it to me in a clip from All in the Family. And it says more than 1,000 op-eds ever could. I'm not going to play the clip. I'm just going to kind of paraphrase it here. Essentially, Michael and Archie are having this moment, and Archie's a little bit under the weather. Looks like he's had a couple drinks. And Michael says to him, Meathead looks at Archie and he says, Did you ever think that possibly your father just might be wrong? And Archie responds to him with his slurred speech, wrong, my old man. Let me tell you something about my old man. He was never wrong about nothing. Michael responds, yes, he was, Arch. My old man used to call people the same things that your old man does, but I always knew he was wrong. He says, so was your old man. And Archie says, no, he wasn't. Michael says, your father was wrong. And Archie, don't tell me. And then Michael comes right back over top of him. Your father was wrong. You don't tell me my father was wrong. Let me tell you something. He's looking at him in his eyes. Your father who made you wrong? Your father, the breadwinner of the house there? A man who goes out and busts his butt to keep a roof over your head? Clothes on your back, you call your father wrong? Hey, your father brings you candy? The first man to throw a baseball to you? Of course, I paused right there, immediately seeing this scene. My dad, as we talked about in this episode of Forgiveness, first man to throw a baseball at me. Let's not forget. And it all ties into what I want to talk about here with the sins of the father. Then Archie says, my father, he had a hand on him. Oh, he's talking about his dad taking him for walks in the park. But he says, oh, he had a hand on him. And, you know, he busted that hand on me once, you know, to teach me to do good. My father, he shoved me in a closet for 7 hours to teach me to do good because he loved me. Then he kind of has a little outburst. Don't be looking at me It's so weird because I remember when I was a kid, it was one of the things that I did. My mom's told me that story. Like don't look at me, stop looking at me. And I would have this thing, especially there was one time I got my hair cut. I hated how it looked. And I just hated the fact that people were looking at me. But what Archie's having in this moment is this notion that Michael's looking at him. He's really kind of looking through him. He's seeing him. He's seeing his vulnerability. He's seeing something that he's never understood, why Archie is the way he is. But here is this man who's obviously had this abuse in his life, and he's not forgiving it. It's something that happened to him. It's something he's making excuses for, and he's continued to make excuses for. And that's why the chain goes unbroken. The sins of the father revisit through Archie because he makes excuses for the abuse that his dad inflicted on him when he was a boy. Then Archie looks at him and he says, let me tell you something. You're supposed to love your father because your father loves you. So how can any man that loves you tell you anything that's wrong? If you want to find this clip, you can go to YouTube and search Archie talks about his father and All in the Family. It's really crushing if you realize what's happening. And I think, again, the brilliance of this show is it talked about cultural issues that we've had for centuries, really. And he's giving voice to what we're going to talk about now and today about this idea of daddy's home and daddy issues. And not daddy issues the way you might think about it, if that rings in your head to, like a young lady has daddy issues. I'm talking about grown men that have daddy issues. And I'm talking about a culture, a patriotism that has daddy issues. And that's why in the last episode I talked about the Founding Daddies, which we'll get to here in a minute. But Archie, he continues to grumble as he goes and lays down on the ground, and Michael is just looking shocked. You can see the empathy in his face, and, he's seeing Archie's just defending his father, insisting that his father deserves respect and reverence and honor. And as the conversation unfolds, we just learn this crucial reality that Archie's father beat him. He was cruel. He was abusive. And for the first time, Meathead really understands Archie. He doesn't excuse him. Again, he can't excuse him, but he can understand him. Archie learned something early, that protecting his father mattered more than telling the truth. That loyalty mattered more than healing. And so then in that moment, Archie Bunker kind of stops being a caricature and he becomes a case study. And that's one thing that I've, because I've my experience with my dad, again, seeing Archie say he's the first person that threw a ball to you, and it reflects so deeply in me, of course. And the reality that I didn't make excuses for my dad. I've never lived in the patriarchy. And this country is founded on these same kind of principles because it doesn't want to look at its past. It insists that the father deserves respect, reverence, and honor. The daddies, the founding daddies. But if there are criticisms to be had, slavery, misogyny, if we have to look at wealth distribution, if that's a thing that we have to look at through the lens of forgiveness and the ability to criticize it, we're never going to be able to rise. Again, this happens in the church. A lot of times when we see in the Catholic Church, we hear these horror stories about the father, right? So it all connects directly to last week. The father is not just a person here, though. The father is a system. The patriarchy teaches us to protect the father at all costs, to sanctify him, and then we can wind up making excuses, whitewashing the damage. And then what we've done culturally just sinks in. Like we talked about sinking into Archie's favorite chair. We forgive not to forget, but to stop the sins of the father from revisiting the next generation. Because if we refuse to tell the truth, then the cycle just continues. Which is why something as ridiculous as seeing a t-shirt that says "Daddy's home" should stop us cold. I saw this when Trump got reelected, this like shirt with him standing in front of the White House and it says "Daddy's home." And at first, I mean, you have to think it's maybe funny, absurd even. But if you realize what it's actually saying, it's asking grown adults to outsource their moral authority, to surrender discernment, because it tries to call us back to daddy can't be wrong, to confuse power with protection. So the founding daddies, humor can sometimes help deliver us. It's the quickest way to expose a myth, to make it sound exactly like what it is. So if we call instead the founding fathers become the founding daddies, suddenly the whole anachronistic fairy tale starts to collapse. So it's kind of like with America, it's the same thing. We're told, I love the USA. Love the USA. You got to love America the same way you love your dad. But to love without honesty is not love. It's denial. So we sanctify the founding daddies, try and say that they're men of their time. Except you can't do that with even just one figure in history, John Brown, which there are many more like him. But just by John Brown planting his flag in that time, he rejected that excuse completely. So the question isn't whether or not they could have known better. The question is why we keep pretending that they didn't. So forgiveness is not about protecting the father. It's about refusing to become him. And I talked about that a lot in a last episode with my own dad. He presented the contrast for the way that I would shape myself in religious matters or spiritual matters. There's this notion of apathetic theology. I think we've talked about it here before, but it's about the idea of articulating what God is or what God means to us by saying what God isn't. And so we carve away like Michelangelo carving out the angel from the stone. Well, this isn't the angel. Let me carve this piece away. And it's a great vehicle to think about refusing to become our fathers in the notions of the things that they need forgiven for. That doesn't mean that there aren't things that we absolutely revere and cherish. I mean, even my talking to you right now is one of the things that my dad did very fluently, I guess, even more so than me having a pause right there. He was very much a man of words, and I picked up a lot of that from him. I remember always the Reader's Digest. I would always go to the quotable quotes section. My dad always had a copy of the Reader's Digest. I would go to the quotable quotes section. I would go to the words of wisdom section. I would go to the learning new words section. And what does this word mean? And that was all really, because of my dad. So there are positive things, but we can't just sweep stuff under the rug. Just because Archie's dad brought him candy doesn't mean he got to punch him or lock him in a closet for 7 hours. But really, even this brings me to this notion of education versus escalation. So we talk about the founding fathers, we talk about all these different things, and it's education matters. Education doesn't exist to embarrass, it exists to illuminate. But we live in this era of escalation versus education, of this push energy versus pull energy. So Like if someone's sitting on the fence and we shove them, we don't convert them, we radicalize them. So it's like if it's somebody sitting on the fence of an issue that you look at it and you say, man, that's kind of racist. And they might not know that what they're saying is racially insensitive, but they're sitting on the fence, right? But if you go up to them and you attack them and you push them, then they're not going to learn. They're not going to learn that what they're saying is racially sensitive because we attack them instead of teaching them. So they become defensive. If you push somebody, their first knee-jerk reaction is to become defensive. And then they start defending a position that they don't really even intend to defend. So we must empathize before we criticize. It's not weakness, it's strategy. And it's responsibility. Because if we're going to be educating, if we're going to be empathizing, we have to have these things come through us instead of to us, happening to us, right? So education, it can be used as a bludgeon, and then it becomes indistinguishable from propaganda to someone who doesn't understand what you're trying to say. And this gotcha culture, like we live in a gotcha culture where all of this thrives. So if you look at, again, Charlie Kirk, and I never, ever would intend to say that his assassination was excusable. It was the exact opposite. I mean, one of the things that I say and have said consistently now is that the biggest threat is that because we have to be more empathetic to that violence, because we have to say, man, that is grotesque violence, which it absolutely was. It has in that cadence the maybe implication that we're supposed to whitewash all of Charlie's vehemence and his own vitriol and his own nastiness, which it doesn't. We can't do that. So when we're talking about Charlie Kirk, for instance, and we talk about education, Charlie Kirk was going to colleges to attack education on the premise of all of this stuff that we want to talk about. Well, we don't want to talk about the sins of the father because we need to love the USA. And these colleges are starting to teach kids things that we don't want them to necessarily learn. So the gotcha culture, this notion of just lambasting someone, it thrives in the social media scape because it triggers this, fight or flight syndrome. And Charlie would go to unprepared young kids and they would cherry pick the moments of him with this gotcha stuff. And then that fight or flight hijacked clicks. Charlie thrived on that. So you don't see nuance go viral. You see humiliation. And that's what he was trying to do. If you look at it for what it was a push versus a pull energy. And Charlie was just trying to embarrass and humiliate. That's not education. That's spectacle. And the spectacle always serves power better than it will truth. So, I was coming home from the Million Bob March. If you know anything about my year last year, when I say I'm an artist and I'm an activist, those two things definitely intertwined in me writing a bill that I sent to congressmen and senators at state and federal levels to try and protect funding for public media because, one, imagination, two, education. But I was doing all these activations, protests, had a lot of people join me. It was amazing. We did the little Bob Mobs in Chicago and Muncie, where every episode of The Joy of Painting was filmed. And then, of course, at the end of the year, October 29th, Bob's birthday, we did the Million Bob March in Washington, D.C., gave a speech right where Dr. King delivered his I Have a Dream speech. And it was just a surreal, amazing moment. And it's something I'm going to continue here in 2026. But when I was driving home from D.C., I found myself writing a hip hop song for the first time in over a decade. I was, as a musician, I've been kind of re-stimulated. I have a friend of mine that got me sharing music again. And I was like, oh, you gotta hear this song. And then I'm like, wait, I need to reproduce that song. And then it kind of has snowballed into me diving back into my music. But I didn't plan on writing this thing. It just kind of happened. And this song is called Hypocritical Race Theory. It's satire, it's commentary, it's an attempt to cut through revisionism with rhythm. And before I go any further, I want to, play this song. It's about 3.5 minutes long, 2-3 minutes. I don't know what it is. I'll let the music speak for itself. We'll come back after listening to my song here, Hypocritical Race Theory.
Red caps wanna take 'em back to the future like Biff with that almanac. I see MAGA hats on Confederate rats, red on heads, it's lined all over the map. Oxymoronic alternative facts, derailed train of thought that's going off the tracks. The truth hurts, but Kirk's blaming blacks. Sorry Charlie, shouldn't stick your neck out like that. Too soon? I don't say it for laughs, I say it cause Dr. King's been under attack. I say it cause though it hurts, it needs to be heard. These are the men in the context of his own words. When's the last time someone quoted Mr. Rogers and you had these taken out of context dodgers? When's the last time someone mentioned Big Bird and you had to clarify his words? When's the last time someone brought up Bob Ross and he compared abortion to the Holocaust? When's the last time you were reading with LeVar Burton and someone claimed education's causing this hurting? Nope, you gotta read, man. That's how your mind's free, man. Hypocritical race theory, they trying to erase, but hey Siri, who's David Walker and what was his appeal to the people from whom the founding fathers steal? Hypocritical race theory, they trying to erase, but hey Siri, who's John Brown, why'd he swarm the bees? Who's Sally Hemings and was she ever free? They don't want us woke, just spokes on a wheel. Spoke truth to power, then they concealed my real. Shadow banned and awakened the American scheme, forsaking this nightmarish fever dream. At the end of the rope, pretending when we mentioned sundown towns, it wasn't them that was lynching. Confused about Edmund Pettis' privileges, like it wasn't them spitting on Ruby Bridges. It's so ridiculous to see it plain as day. They used to whip slaves, then go into church to pray. The grossest libel. Tommy J wrote his own and they found it in his Bible. Hypocritical race theory, they're trying to erase, but hey Siri,
how can we explain how this past occurred? And why did we learn about the Tulsa Massacre?
hypocritical race theory, they're trying to erase, but hey Siri, how can we explain statues of Klansmen while they desecrate the grave of Fred Hampton? Hey Siri, who's Fred Hampton? Hey Siri, why did the FBI assassinate Fred Hampton? Hey Siri, what's critical race theory? Hypocritical race theory, they're trying to erase, but hey Siri, who's James Baldwin? What's the fire next time? Hey Siri, who's Sojourner Truth? Hey Siri, I gotta know, who's Jim Crow?
So what this song is pointing to underneath the satire, in some ways, is education. That's why, hey Siri, I'm hoping it would be really amazing. Part of what I was hoping the brilliance of this song would be is if someone's listening to it and then the hey Siri command comes up, and maybe it's happening right now even, then the Siri starts listening, and then the phrase that follows it is actually triggered into the person's phone. So basically, if I say, hey Siri, who's Fred Hampton? Then it would actually play that. And it's crazy because to me, the reason why the song came and that chorus came to me was because I'm just saying all we have to do is ask. All we have to do is ask some questions. And the notion that they want to cut out what they call critical race theory, is because, again, it points to the sins of the father. And so all we got to do is ask, who's David Walker and what was his appeal? If you can ask that question, it's going to send you down a path that will have to lead to a reconciliation, empathy, forgiveness, or potentially not. And maybe that's what they're most afraid of. But either way, ignorance is not bliss, because the systems only work when people don't understand how they were built. So if you look at something like redistricting, and that's one of these issues that is going around, you know, they're trying to redraw these lines. But if you look at redistricting, it's not going to make sense if you don't understand the history of redlining. And if you don't know what that means, hey Siri, what's redlining? I mean, it's so simple, right? But there's a fog that's thrown, and it's so easy to do when the people who are educating are pushers, when they're people who want to humiliate and make you sound like you're stupid because you don't know. If you do that, you're not serving the cause. Be empathetic. Be a hand up to someone. Help pull them instead of pushing them. So something like the Electoral College doesn't make sense unless you understand the history of slavery in the country. And when people post maps showing a landmass instead of a population and say, oh, look at this, I guess the country isn't so evenly split after all. And you see these big red brush strokes across the map. Well, land doesn't vote. They're not revealing truth. They're revealing an ignorance. The land doesn't vote. There are more people in, New York City condensed than, whole states almost, right? I mean, at least massive parts of states. You could go there. It's landmass and wild animals and cornfields. You know what I mean? So the landmass doesn't vote. But if you look at the Electoral College, you realize landmass not voting. There's no reason for redistricting, right? The notion of drawing those lines again, it defeats them right out the gate. If you were to say, I thought my vote mattered. I thought that it mattered. Your vote only matters in the land. It only matters in the lines drawn around it in a box, right? The popular vote. This is not a popular democracy. Presidents have lost the presidency to the Electoral College having won the popular vote. So your vote, your single voice doesn't really matter. And by drawing those lines again, by having the impetus to want to do that, to even have the notion to want to do it, is guilt. I mean, it's red line, red hands. I mean, this is red hats. And I mean, I'm not saying that everybody who is on the right of the political spectrum is wrong about everything. That's not the way I work. But I'm saying this is an issue where it is quite simply logic and reason. You can't dance around it. But really what I want to get to is that education creates empathy. Empathy will destabilize authoritarianism. So therefore, authoritarianism is always going to attack education. That's the through line. This is not a conspiracy or hyperbole. It's a pattern. It's like I think about Mark Twain. He says that travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. This is not Mark Twain being poetic. It's not fluff. It's a warning. Travel doesn't have to mean physical movement. I mean, it does, and it can. But what he's really getting at, it's the narrative travel, cognitive travel, imaginative travel. So when we do go outside of our sphere, we start to see different cultural things, different ideas. Books can do this, though. Stories do this. And public media did it, for sure. So when they remove access to those things, you keep people where they are, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and politically. And again, the irony of it all It's not really ironic. It's not ironic. It's strategy. It's really strategy. What I was about to say is that with the public media, there are the places that are the most affected by the current administration and, of course, the states that followed suit in Donald Trump's intention here to dismantle public media. Those that followed suit are the most impacted areas are rural communities. And they're and people are saying, well, don't they understand they're the ones that are going to be hurt the most? No, they don't understand that they're the ones that are going to be hurt the most because it doesn't register as hurt to them. Because strategically, that is where they want to keep people, right? I mean, even if you look at Sesame Street, if you're a kid watching Sesame Street in a rural community, that might be your first escape outside of the rural community. Sesame Street is, a New York urban environment. And not only are you seeing things that you don't see at home in the sense of just structures and ideas, you're seeing people of different colors and people of different ethnicities, and it's becoming familiar and something that you're not going to feel tribally against. But if you can't travel, and then you can't travel with your imagination, and you can't travel in story, then they can keep you bound. So, Jackie Robinson, for instance, I have this book. When I was living in a rural area, I grew up in Knox, Indiana. And the year that I graduated from high school, I graduated from Valparaiso. But the year that I graduated, the Grand Dragon of the Indiana chapter of the Ku Klux Klan was living in Knox. He was living for a while before he was murdered by his lady that was living in his house with him. I don't know if they were married or what, but in 1997, he was killed in Knox, Indiana. So I grew up in a different milieu, in a different cultural frame. But yet I still had access to things outside. My mom gave us this series of values books, the value of imagination, the value of curiosity, the value of courage was the Jackie Robinson story. So again, baseball in my life, so crazy, right? Learning though about Jackie Robinson was not learning about baseball. It was about, I was being ushered into another person's reality. And that empathy woke me. Imagine that. The attack on being woke. I was awakened at a very young age. I was probably 8 years old, and it expanded me. And if I had never encountered that story, I might be a completely different person. Never seeing injustice framed as unjust. Never being asked, to identify with someone that was unlike me. I didn't have black people around me in Knox, Indiana. We had 2 people in my school, 2 friends that I can remember. I won't say their names here, but, just to kind of keep away from that. But the vacuum doesn't remain neutral. It can fill with tribalism, and that's what they count on. So, if you look at this attempt to redact words, DEI, empathy, racism, inclusion, from Head Start, an educational framework, it's not semantics. It's cultural anesthesia. I mean, these are literal words. The list, if you go and look at the list of words that Trump pushed to get redacted from Head Start and educational frameworks, you would just be astounded to see some of these words. If a child never learns the word for a thing, they never learn to see the thing. And this is Orwellian. Again, not metaphorically, but structurally. Double speak words by shrinking language until the thought itself collapses. So again, aside from imagination, which would take me a whole different path, we're talking mainly about education here, even though Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. The reason why public media, one of the reasons why public media is dangerous to authoritarianism is it bypasses this market logic of outrage. Like Sesame Street alone dismantles isolationism. Child in a rural town sees people of different races, urban environments, shared emotional experiences, cooperation as normal. You know, Mr. Rogers shows emotional literacy without shame. And Reading Rainbow takes kids to places that they might never physically go. Again, this is travel. This is Twain's idea delivered through reading, through words. So the part that just has to be said clearly, not with contempt, but it's these rural communities that are hit first and hardest when public media is defunded. And they're the ones that are also having daddy issues. They're the ones who celebrate the Founding Daddies without any education on what this means. So if they can remove something like any kind of, it's not just public broadcasting, but it's why it's a target. You remove it and you don't create independence, you create containment. Kids become trapped inside the narrow bandwidth of their immediate environment, and that's what they want, because that's where the cycle is happening. The sins of the daddy are there, the Founding Daddies. That's not freedom, that's enclosure. And again, that red state map illusion just has to be dismantled. Land doesn't vote, people do. Square mile of New York City contains more human experience than hundreds of square miles in Wyoming. That's just the better way to think about it. Nothing against Wyoming. I'm just saying a square mile of New York City contains more human experience. It's not a diss. It's not a push. It's a fact. Wyoming has big hundreds of square miles where there's not a human experience happening. There's animal experience, there's land experience, environmental experience. Not to discount those things. Of course, we enter those places for solace, but showing landmass as political dominance is just visual propaganda. Whether it's intentional or not, that's what it is. Insularity is geographic, but insularity is also informational. Insularity is educational. And public media can break that bubble. It has broken that bubble, which is precisely why it's attacked. So for me with PBS and, Bob Ross and Mr. Rogers, it's not about saving a TV station. It's about whether imagination and education, edutainment can remain public. But if you drain education, you can drain empathy and drain shared stories. What remains is just fear, obedience, and grievance. And I just don't think it's an accident. Not a happy accident for sure. It's design. So, I'm just trying to ask, do we want citizens or do we want subjects? That's a big question. Do we want citizens or do we want subjects? And thinking about education, thinking about entertainment, thinking about all these different things, I'm reading this idea about the Kennedy Center and all of this stuff that's happening around the Kennedy Center. It was before Trump did the most recent thing, which is illegal, putting his name and trying to change his name, change the Kennedy Center to the Trump and Kennedy Center, whatever the heck it says, is illegal. Like, again, look it up. Education will help you get there. But it wasn't about that. It was about this idea of so much more funds being raised for the Kennedy Center. But it's just not even an isolated distortion. It's just the most recent flare in a long, dark map. If you zoom out, you can see this pattern. The administration has not just been indifferent to the arts. It's been openly and repeatedly hostile towards them. And the evidence is not subtle. Like in 2025 alone, the Trump administration moved to eliminate the National Endowment for the Arts, eliminate the National Endowment for the Humanities, eliminate the Institution of Museum and Library Services, and slash federal cultural support across the board. These aren't symbolic gestures, and they're definitely not budgetary concerns. Because again, if you look at public media, for instance, the amount of money that it would cost your average taxpayer is about $1.65 a year. You can't even buy a cup of coffee for $1.65. It was costing you $1.65 out of your pocket. It's such a minuscule part of the budget. On the other hand, the military-industrial complex is costing the average household about $7,000 a year. So $1.65 versus $7,000, maybe we have a little bit of, imbalance. But again, the symbols or these gestures weren't symbolic. They're written in budgets, drafted in appropriation bills, and just enacted through the quiet machinery of grant cancellations. Dozens of NEA grants rescinded after years of continuous support. Museums across the country reporting lost federal contracts, with 1/3 of them saying that the cuts struck at the heart of their operations. Entire ecosystem of libraries, museums, community art spaces just left scrambling to fill the gaps that federal agencies once supported. So then I see this thing, it's like propaganda reframing reaction as achievement. This notion that support to the Kennedy Center, that it increased over, from the Biden administration just seemed insane to me. So like when small museums beg donors for emergency support because their NEH grant evaporated, the administration can't point to the increase in private investment in the arts as if it were applause instead of triage. I mean, this is the inversion that we're living through. The federal government breaks the bones of a cultural ecosystem, then holds up the X-ray as evidence of fitness. Like, if you want to understand the true intention behind these cuts, the psychological intention, the historical intention, perhaps authoritarian intention, you just look not just at the dollars, but at the pattern. Arts funding is never the first thing that a healthy society would discard. Arts funding is the first thing a frightened regime would attack, because the artist is the witness. I talked about this when I gave my speech in front of the Lincoln Memorial, right at the reflecting pool there where, freaking Forrest Gump hugged Jenny. The artist is the witness. The artist is the mirror. The artist is the recorder of the age, and nothing terrifies power more than an honest witness. And so when I stood there on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial during the Million Bob March, where Dr. King once thundered his words that changed the spine of this country, I said, as dressed as Bob Ross with my afro and paint-softened fury of a gentle prophet, that they come first for the artist, because if you can silence the witness, you can rewrite the whole story. You can murder the narrative and bury the truth with it. And that's exactly what these cuts are designed to do. Not to save money, not to streamline budgets, and not to modernize the arts, if anything, but to weaken the witness, to dim the national memory, to hollow out institutions that carry our collective imagination. So the only stories left are the ones that are written by people in power, by the Founding Daddies. Again, that's why you don't know David Walker and his appeal, because it's sharply critical of Thomas Jefferson, and they couldn't have that. And even within David Walker's appeal, he says, you think that just ending this one thing won't end the reverberation through the way that you've sanctified these people? He addresses it so squarely. So if you get a chance, pick up David Walker's appeal. It will guaranteed change your perspective. But this is the part of the story no headline is going to show. It's the part of the story that propaganda will always reverse. But it's the part of the story that matters. Because if you understand what they're doing to the arts, you understand what they're doing to the country. And so we've laid this groundwork to look at these things. Public media, it just lives in this idea. But we have to be careful that we don't criticize before we empathize. There's clear evidence living here. This fight for imagination becomes a fight for democracy itself. And these headlines, though, they can arrive. It's like deja vu, as if Orwell sent them ahead of time. And then, like, when I stumble on this on my feed, like the grace of a drunk magician, private donations to the Kennedy Center have doubled under Trump, or whatever the heck it was. On its face, again, it sounds like triumph. It's the resurrection of the arts, like prosperity, seeded and blossoming under strong, steady leadership. But we've forgotten this central trick of propaganda, the sleight of mind that turns confusion into clarity and harm into help. The propaganda reframes reaction as achievement. That's the whole mechanism. The wand, the smoke, and the mirror. Cut 10 million from somebody, then congratulate yourself when their friends pass the hat. It's like announcing record sales in sandbags after you dynamite the dam. And the headline that little sugar cube leaves out one spectacularly important detail. The very administration under which these donations doubled, or whatever it was, is the same administration proposing 17.2% reduction in federal support to the Kennedy Center. A cut worth $8 to $10 million. A cut that forced a surge of private giving because without it, the institution would stagger. But the story's not told that way. The story's told as if the wound were a harvest, as if the response to the injury were proof that the injurer is doing God's work. And so this dark, shady geometry of political illusion, harm creates a crisis, then the crisis creates a response, and then the response is sold back to the public as evidence of the leader's greatness. Again, it's Orwell, it's the Orwellian playbook. So when I read that headline, the ache of the language being bent until it screams just makes me nauseous. Because the trick happens in that tiny hinge of causality, like just even the phrase "because of." Think about what that means. Private donations increased because of Trump. The phrase is a con. It's the house of cards. Because of, if you just say because of, it doesn't discriminate between blessing and curse. It merely points. It reminds me of something I've said many times on the show and what we talked about here already. The founding fathers, my founding father, I don't drink because of my dad. So if you don't know the frame of reference, depending on who's listening and how much context you have, that sentence can read as a tribute. It's a trauma, or maybe a twisted combination of both. It happened through me instead of to me. So the question would be, did my father inspire sobriety through wisdom or through destruction? Did he instruct me or did he wound me? Because of him, is it thanks to him or in spite of him? So without context, the listener just has to supply their own meaning. The reader of a headline, which is what we're always talking about as headlines, who's reading the body of the text? Maybe you are, because you're 50 minutes into listening to me talk about this stuff. But propaganda banks on you not doing that. It depends on our brain's instinct to assume because of implies improvement or a benevolent causation. So some people are reading private donations soared because of Trump. They heard exactly what that propaganda wanted them to hear. But, the truth is always found a little bit in the wound beneath the bandage. In this case specifically, donations didn't rise because of his vision. They rose because of his cuts, because of the vacuum that he created, because of the threat that he posed. And then he's now over here renaming the institution after himself, which again is illegal. But you see this trick, and once you see it, you see how the reaction is laundered into achievement. And you can see it everywhere in the arts, in public health, in disaster response. You can see it in the founding fathers and the founding daddies. You can see it in this daddy's home. So today's conversation has obviously been much larger than just the Kennedy Center and public media. I'm saying it stretches across the whole terrain of American perception, perspective. All of it, all of the propaganda, all of the cuts, all of the distractions, all the reframing of reaction as achievement, a single destination, your perspective. Again, Viktor Frankl wrote, a human being is a deciding being. That space between stimulus and response, there's a gap. That gap is where our freedom lives. And propaganda thrives on collapsing that gap. The idea of the patriarchy, the founding daddies, the whitewashing of history, the attack on education, collapse the gap. Don't let them think. Don't let them have questions. Imagination, education, collapse it. And then it rushes in with a prefabricated story. It hands you the conclusion before you've had the chance to reflect. And it hijacks that deciding space and fills it with identity, tribalism, emotion, belonging, fear of attack, fear of not belonging. I'm not here to tell anyone what they should believe, but I am here to illuminate the patterns. The same patterns that I've recognized through my travel and imagination and reading, through looking at history, and of course, in my own life. It's like, that's why I can say, I remember when I was a kid, I used to sing that song, and I'm proud to be an American, and at least and it's like I grew up. And I'm not saying that the song in and of itself is bad. I'm just saying it's generic. It's a wildly generic, paper thin caricature. And so when those patterns, I see the political identity, it tries to masquerade then as family identity. That's why I see it when I encounter that shirt that says Daddy's Home with Trump standing in front of the White House. Calling a political figure daddy. The analyst in me, the witness in me, it just pauses immediately. If we strip away the strangeness, and even if we assume this is all being expressed in some innocent, symbolic way, it's still like, what does it mean to see a political leader as a father? And what does it mean to celebrate the father unconditionally? That's what we've done. That's why I have a series of work that I'm going to create sometime in the future. It's on my deck here to get a million things that I've got to get done. The patron saints of the United States. Our history classes in the United States are indoctrination classes. They're based more in the religion of sanctifying the founding daddies than they are in actually understanding history. When you listen to that song, why didn't they teach us about the Tulsa massacre? Why not? Well, because then it leads you to empathy. It leads you to say, wow, there were some really crazy things that have happened here. And so this is the truth. It's not partisan. It's a human truth. A father is not someone that you honor blindly. A father is someone whose legacy should be examined, whose impact we must understand, and whose sins we have to refuse to carry forward. I loved my dad. I forgave my dad. We healed our relationship. But healing only happens because we told the truth. Healing happened because I could stand in front of him and say, these sins will not revisit the next generation, not on my watch. So you don't honor a father who refuses to honor himself. You don't sanctify a legacy that wounds the family. You don't build a cult around the man who burns down the house. So the old patriarchal tradition demanded unconditional reverence for the father. That's the daddy issue. Even when the father was wrong, even when the father harmed the people he was supposed to protect. It was a tradition designed not for love, but for impunity. Real men, real fathers do the opposite. In the Bible, it says a wise man seeks rebuke. Real men confront their failures. Real men grow from their mistakes. Real men do not lash out like infants when they're challenged. And I'm saying men only because we're talking about founding daddies. Of course, women, obviously real women across the globe need to confront their failures and their mistakes. But here we're talking about the patriarchy, something that's been set up to protect. So when I see a movement that demands a kind of worship toward a political figure, a man who shows really none of the qualities of a responsible father, I recognize the pattern. So I could say to Donald Trump even, I forgive you for the abuses. If you want to change, and if you want to move on. And so we talked about Archie in the beginning of this, and we looked at the way that Donald Trump responded to Rob Reiner passing. I've seen more people on the right finally set down a little bit of space that said, wow, that was really inappropriate how Donald Trump responded to Rob Reiner's passing. But when it comes to propaganda, we first see that they offer identity, then they sell belonging, and finally merge both into substitution for selfhood, and they collapse that gap. And then a deciding being becomes a reacting being. A sovereign mind becomes a team jersey. And we're going to talk about sports and politics in the next episode, and teams and what all this means. A citizen becomes a follower. A man becomes a child in search of a father who cannot father himself. And all of this matters because when your perspective is hijacked, when your sense of self is compromised, you become vulnerable to the reframing of reality itself. And that reframing, the manipulation of cause and effect, spell casting of headlines, erasure of context, it's all so Orwellian. If nowhere more apparent, nowhere more dangerous than what's happened to public media. Again, because if the artist is the witness to the age and the public media is an archive of an age, those who want to control the story first learn how to starve the storytellers. And that's where this is heading. And that's why we're here to try and change the perspective. Saturdays at noon, WVLP.org. If you catch reruns, you can find those on Wednesday on WVLP.org at 6 p.m. And if you miss any of that, you can go to my website, jjweinberg.com/perspective. Thanks for listening.
The Founding Daddies, Public Media, and Hypocritical Race Theory.
Perception is reality. Perspective shapes the world around you. I'm JJ Weinberg, and this is my perspective.